Jacco van Loon, reader in astrophysics, director of the Keele Observatory at Keele University in the UK. Jacco, thanks so much for joining us. Give us, first of all, a very brief lesson. Where do asteroids come from? I was just doing some research and I found that there's a connection with comets.
Yes, both asteroids and comets are the leftovers from the formation of the planets. So this happened 4.5 billion years ago, but much of that material is still orbiting the Sun, just like the Earth does. But those orbits are not necessarily circular, so they can sometimes cross the orbit of the Earth and impact.
So how likely is it that an object large enough to cause serious damage is going to hit us at some stage?
Yeah, luckily, the larger the object, the rarer. So there are many more smaller objects, and many people have seen meteors before. They're tiny. So to see events like in Tunguska and Chelyabinsk, they happen every few centuries or so. Tunguska's event is expected to happen maybe every 1,000 years or so, and Chelyabinsk every century.
But we had one also. So, Jacco, didn't we have one, because we're talking 1908 Siberia? Wasn't there also one in the empty quarter around that time in the early part of the century as well? So that was two in a few years.
Of course, sometimes they happen in a quicker succession than on average, but then there might be a longer period until the next one hits. So this is all just statistical. Now, the problem is that these impacts, they don't actually, as was described, create a crater on the ground. So it's very difficult to know in the past how many of these events have happened. We do know about impact craters, which are 10,000 years old, 20,000 years old. They're caused by denser objects, also asteroids, but they are much more iron-rich, and they don't actually explode. They do hit the ground. But about these events like Tunguska, it's just on the basis of the few events that have been seen.
How much warning might we get to prepare?
Well, for Chelyabinsk, we did. Well, for Tunguska, we didn't, because we didn't have the equipment. But Chelyabinsk happened behind our backs when we were watching another somewhat large object, more like the size of Tunguska, which passed us very close by, but it was not going to hit us. But telescopes pointed in that direction, and on the same day, we were hit behind by this Chelyabinsk objects. So those are small enough to escape notice, and that's why there are now dedicated missions to also look for those smaller objects, which, although they won't cause mass extinction events, for instance, but they can cause a lot of harm if they hit urban areas in particular.
Okay, so if there is something coming towards us, I mean, we were talking about Armageddon and Bruce Willis going up in a space shuttle and eventually having to sacrifice himself because of the bomb that needed to be detonated on the asteroid that was going to destroy the whole world. What are the more realistic ideas that we have in terms of how to divert such a huge object?
It depends on the time we have. If we know well in advance when an object is going to come too near for comfort, we could go there and, for instance, give it a nudge with propulsion systems or something like that. It needs very little to just divert it off course. But of course, if you only find out very shortly before impact, then there's less and less that can be done. But just shooting at it, it's probably going to be more risky than taking the impact. But one thing I wanted to say is that the objects in the solar system could be found and monitored. But we've also found objects that came from outside the solar system. And so one, quite large, a few hundred meters across, was discovered a few years ago, but less than a year before it actually crossed the solar system. So those you can't see coming. And you only have maybe a year or so to prepare for such events, because they're very unlikely to hit us. And you were talking about many millions of years for catastrophic events like the one that's possibly wiped out the dinosaurs that happened 66 million years ago. So you can see that these are quite rare events, but they have happened and they will happen again.
Jacco, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you on. Jacco van Loon from Keele University.